My name is Kirk Bloodsworth. I'm the first person freed from death row by DNA testing. When they slammed that 300-pound door shut, my life was over. If it can happen to an honorably discharged Marine with no criminal record or criminal history, it can happen to anybody in America.
In 1984, at the age of 22, Kirk Bloodsworth was charged with the brutal sexual assault and murder of 9-year-old Dawn Hamilton. Then, 9 years later, in 1993, he became the first person on death row to be exonerated based on DNA testing. In 1984, in her hometown of Rosedale, Maryland, Dawn Hamilton was playing hide-and-go-seek with her friends in the forest. She was searching for her friends when she came across 2 young boys, aged 7 and 10, who were fishing in the pond. These boys saw a man come out of the forest and offered to help Dawn find her friends. At 2 p.m. that day, her body was found face down in the leaves. Her underwear and shorts were found discarded in a tree nearby. Her head had been crushed with a rock, and there was an imprint of a shoe on her neck. After Dawn's body was found, the 2 boys went to the police and described the man they saw approach Dawn. When the boys came into the police station, they were not separated to give descriptions of the man and accounts of what happened, but rather were interviewed and came up with the sketch together. No sketch artist was available, so police used Identikit, which is a kit containing drawings of hairlines, eyes, noses, chins, etc., in a wide variety of shapes and sizes to construct a composite picture of a suspect from a description provided by a witness. The boys described the man as being 6 foot 5 feet tall, having tan skin, light curly hair, and a bushy mustache. Once the composite picture was done, the boys noticed parts of the sketch aren't accurate, such as the mustache, but agreed it was a rough estimate. Instead of changing the sketch, the police convinced the boys that this was the man they saw and they released the composite to the public. Another woman came forward to the police that day saying she saw a man walking alone in the forest Dawn was killed in the day of the murder, but the sketch she provided to police did not match the one given by the boys, so it was thrown out. Kirk Bloodsworth had just moved to Maryland 30 days prior to the murder. He was an ex-Marine who was honorably discharged and was working as a waterman on the Eastern Shore. He did not have a good marriage with his first wife, so on August 3rd, 1984, he left her and began hitchhiking from Baltimore to Cambridge, where he stayed with a cousin. On August 7th, a Cambridge police officer showed up at Bloodsworth's cousin's house to inform him that his wife had filed a missing persons report. He told the police officer to tell his wife that he was okay and he was sorry about what had happened between them. The police had set up an anonymous tip line and over 500 people called in with information. Out of these tips, an old neighbor of Kirk's called in saying that the composite sketch released by the police looked like Kirk Bloodsworth. If you recall, the boys described the man they saw in the forest as being 6 foot 5 feet tall, having tan skin, curly light hair, and a bushy mustache. But Kirk Bloodsworth was 6 feet tall, had bright red hair, and was well over 200 pounds. On August 8th, 1984, Baltimore County Police came to the house Kirk was staying at and asked if they could bring him into the station for an interview. Kirk willingly agreed and was brought down to the police station for questioning. Once arriving at the police station, Kirk remembered that he had an ounce of marijuana in his shoe and instantly became nervous because that's what he believed he was being brought in for. The detectives began questioning Kirk about the murder of Dawn Hamilton, which he continuously denied knowing anything about. They then brought out the bloody rock that was used as the murder weapon and Dawn's underwear that was found near the body. He once again denied ever seeing either of those objects. Before he left, the cops took a Polaroid picture of him that would later be used in a police photo lineup. Kirk was shaken up after leaving the police station, realizing he had just become a suspect in the murder of a girl he had never met before. After leaving the police station in a state of shock, he told a female friend what he had just gone through at the police station. The next day, this Polaroid was shown to the 2 young boys who gave the original description of the perpetrator. The boys both said that Kirk's hair was too red, but he looked roughly like the guy they saw. At 2:45 a.m. that same day, based solely off of eyewitness identification, police arrested Kirk Bloodsworth for the rape and murder of Dawn Hamilton.
It was, by any measure, a most horrid crime. On a hot summer's day in 1984, a little girl is found brutally murdered and sexually assaulted in the woods in Rosedale. 9-year-old Dawn Hamilton had suffered severe head injuries. Her killer had strangled her by stepping on her throat, and she'd been sexually abused with a stick. 2 weeks later, Baltimore County Police arrested Kirk Bloodsworth. A jury convicted him. A judge sentenced him to death.
Mr. Bloodsworth, you want to make any statement at all?
Move out of the way, please. Guilty.
After his arrest, the same female friend that Kirk told about his experience at the police station the day prior came forward to police saying that Kirk had told her about the murder weapon.
But I was just relaying what the cops said to me. Why are you talking about the rock? I said, the rock you had on the table, man. Well, that could have been from another case. How did you know it was from it? I said, I just said that's what you had sitting on there.
The detectives questioned Kirk about his relationship with his ex-wife. On the day Kirk left his wife in Baltimore, he promised his wife that they would go out and get her favorite taco salad. He felt terrible about breaking this promise and leaving her, so he told the cop, "I did a terrible thing and my wife and I probably won't get back together because of it." Despite explaining to the cop that he was referring to leaving his wife, they took this statement and used it in a court in a way that was most favorable to them, that he was referring to the murder of Dawn. During this interrogation, Kirk repeatedly asked for a lawyer but was denied each time. He also asked if he could make a phone call to his father, but this request was also denied. Kirk Bloodsworth was arrested on a Thursday, and the police photo lineup wasn't scheduled until the following Monday. The 5 witnesses coming in for the photo lineup were told to try and avoid watching the news, but this would be difficult because Kirk's face and name were in every newspaper and on every TV station.
There were 6 people in the lineup. I was number 6. I was on the very end. And the 2 little boys never picked me out of the lineup.
They had one individual identified me by watching me on television, and they let him come to the lineup and testify in open court.
2 weeks later, I would find out that the 2 main witnesses, the 2 little boys, their parents, called the police
and said that we made a mistake. It was really number 6, and that's the position I stood in.
After 8 months of preparation, on the day before trial, Kirk's lawyer came to him in jail and told him to just come clean, asking him to admit to the murder. Due to the age of the victim and the brutality of the killing, it was a high-profile murder that attracted a lot of media attention. This was not a case that Kirk's lawyer was prepared to take on. The trial lasted 2 weeks, and the prosecution brought in 5 witnesses that claimed to see Kirk near the forest or with Dawn on the day of the murder. A police officer created a profile based off of the evidence of the person who he believed committed the crime. They said this person would be between the ages of 18 to 22, loved water, and would live with a domineering wife or mother. All these traits match Kirk Bloodsworth. The problem with this profile was that it was created by a Baltimore police officer after they had already arrested Kirk. Kirk's defense lawyer did nothing to dispute this profile, and his entire defense was only a fraction of the prosecution's. This case was taken to the grand jury based on eyewitness identification alone, and the grand jury found him guilty on all counts of first-degree murder. There was no DNA evidence linking Kirk to the crime, he had no motive, and he had an alibi placing him at home the time of the murder. Kirk Bloodsworth received the death penalty based off of circumstantial evidence. In both of Bloodsworth's appeals, his defense challenged the evidence about the rock and the conversation about his wife. Also, the police had failed to inform the defense that there may have been other suspects. Originally, police were looking into multiple other suspects in the case, but once Bloodsworth was arrested, these suspects were never pursued. Bloodsworth's conviction was overturned by an appellate court 2 years after his original conviction, and he was retried. This time, he was sentenced to 2 life sentences instead of death row. In the early 1990s, Bloodsworth learned about DNA testing and the opportunities it could provide to prove his innocence. He emailed the prosecutor asking for DNA testing to be done on the underwear found at the scene of the crime. The prosecution told him that the evidence had been destroyed when in actuality they just couldn't find it. Kirk reached out to a well-known defense lawyer, Bob Moore, and got him to take his case pro bono. Bob Moore went to the courthouse and found the lost DNA evidence in a paper bag in the closet of the judge. The victim's DNA found on her shorts and underwear, a stick found at the scene, and an autopsy slide were compared against the DNA of Kirk Bloodsworth. The DNA lab determined that the testing on the underwear excluded Bloodsworth, and replicate testing performed by the FBI yielded the same results. Kirk Bloodsworth was released from prison in June of 1993 and pardoned in December of 1993. 10 years after Kirk Bloodsworth was cleared for the murder of Dawn Hamilton, the DNA evidence found at the scene was uploaded to a national database. The DNA matched Kimberly Shea Ruffner, a former East Baltimore man with a history of sexual attacks. He acknowledged that he alone had sexually assaulted and murdered 9-year-old Dawn Hamilton back in 1984. There are multiple factors that led to Kirk Bloodsworth's wrongful conviction. The first and most prominent factor leading to his wrongful conviction was eyewitness misidentification. Eyewitness misidentification is the single most important factor leading to wrongful convictions. In fact, with the exception of DNA evidence, nothing can be more damning for a defendant than a witness telling the jury that the defendant was at the scene of the crime. In Kirk's case, the boys gave a completely false description of the man they saw in the forest. Kimberly Ruffner, the actual man they saw that day, is 5'6" and 160 pounds with brown hair. One possible reason to explain this misidentification is that the boys were under high stress or anxiety when viewing the man, causing them to remember it incorrectly. The second potential reason is that the human memory reconstructs incidents because humans do not have the capability to record memories like a video camera. Therefore, due to the boys being interviewed together, the composite they came up with could be a figure of their imagination. This leads to the second factor causing Kirk Bloodsworth's wrongful conviction, which is judicial malpractice. When the young boys came into the police station, they should have been separated and individually interviewed to give separate descriptions to avoid contamination. This way, the police could have compared the two descriptions given by the boys to try to find similarities and differences. Also, when the boys were not satisfied with the composite they had created, instead of altering the image, the police pressured the boys into believing the composite they created was the man they saw. Due to the age of the boys, they would be easily influenced by someone in a position of authority. Another example of judicial malpractice in Kirk's case was in the scheduling of the police photo lineup. The photo lineup was scheduled after Kirk had been arrested, therefore the witnesses had already seen his face in the media. This creates an internal bias, and due to already being exposed to his image, they are more likely to choose Kirk's face from the police photo lineup. When Kirk became a suspect in the murder of Dawn Hamilton, he was 22 years old and knew very little about the criminal justice system. He was questioned without a lawyer, and when he asked for a lawyer, he was repeatedly denied. The United States Miranda rights that he would have been read upon arrest state that he has the right to consult a lawyer before talking to the police, but Kirk was denied this right. The third example of judicial malpractice in Kirk's case was the improper storage of evidence. The DNA evidence from the scene of the crime was stored in a paper bag in the judge's closet at the courthouse. This evidence was eventually found and led to his exoneration, but due to it not being stored and recorded properly, it could have been easily lost or damaged. The final example of judicial malpractice in Kirk's case was in the profile of the murderer created by the Baltimore police. The profile was created after Kirk had already been arrested, therefore it could have been altered to match his description. It was also created by one of the officers who had already interviewed Kirk. This profile would be used against him in court. The third factor that led to Kirk Bloodsworth's wrongful conviction was target practices of the police. Police had tunnel vision on Kirk, meaning they focused so much on him that it tainted their interpretation and evaluation of subsequent information received, which unconsciously filters evidence and ignores or suppresses exculpatory evidence. On the day Dawn was murdered, a woman came into the police station saying she saw a man in the forest around the time Dawn was killed. But due to the fact that her description did not match the description the young boys gave, her tip was thrown out and never investigated. Before receiving the anonymous tip that Bloodsworth matched the composite sketch, the police were investigating many other suspects, one of them being Kimberly Ruffner. But once they received this tip, they no longer considered any of these suspects. The police suppressed this evidence and it was never released to Bloodsworth's defense team. The fourth factor leading to Kirk's wrongful conviction was the media bias. Due to the age of the victim and the brutality of the murder, the town was outraged and desperate to bring Dawn justice. Eyewitnesses were learning and seeing information on the case in the media before they were even brought into the police station for questioning. When the jury read out the verdict that Kirk was sentenced to death, the courtroom exploded with cheers and the town believed that justice had been served. Kirk's face was all over the media, causing the town to believe he was guilty before he even stepped into a courtroom. The fifth factor leading to Kirk's wrongful conviction was his low socioeconomic status. Kirk was arrested when he was 22 years old, working as a fisherman with little money and no knowledge of the criminal justice system. He could not afford a good lawyer, and his first lawyer ultimately failed him in the courtroom.
I just didn't get any help from my lawyer. I didn't. And I felt like every single person was against me. Right before we went to court, he comes to me the day before. In all these months now, 8 months worth of waiting, he comes to me the day before and says, Kirk, you gotta come clean, man. I said, what the fuck are you talking about, man?
Kirk's lawyer lacked the skills and experience needed to create a persuasive case to convince the jury of his innocence. Kirk Bloodsworth has used his experience to foster widespread, meaningful criminal justice reform. In 2004, the federal government established a grant program bearing Bloodsworth's name to fund post-conviction DNA testing for others trying to prove their innocence. And in 2013, after becoming an anti-death penalty activist with the organization Witness to Innocence, Bloodsworth was present when the Maryland governor signed a measure repealing the death penalty. Today, Bloodsworth is a jewelry artisan as well as an activist, writer, and public speaker on the issues of wrongful conviction and the death penalty.